Hi everyone, it's Professor Clark, and today's topic is the last topic of Chapter 1 of Fuji, and it's forming the imperative. And this is one of those things that when I learned it, it seemed really straightforward to me, and I never really had any trouble with it. And then when I encountered it in textbooks, it seemed really confusing. So as we go through this, it might seem kind of confusing to you, and we have these kind of branching logic chains that you have to follow to figure out the right way to form the imperative, and somehow they make really heavy weather out of something that's pretty straightforward, at least when you're actually using it and you're learning it just by hearing people use it around you. So the thing to keep in mind with the imperative is that there are really just a few verbs that are commonly used in the imperative, and so if you're finding these instructions on how to use it kind of confusing, don't fear, just memorize some key verbs that are commonly used in the imperative, and that will get you 90% of the way there. It really will. So what is the imperative? The imperative is the command form of the verb, like do this, do that. And we don't use it a lot in English a lot of the time. It's not actually very polite in English, but in Russian, it's a perfectly polite form of the verb to use and is used very commonly. So you can have some awkward cultural misunderstandings between Russian and English this way. I remember touring a church in St. Petersburg, and our tour guide kept saying to us in English, pay attention to this, pay attention to that. Well, in Russian, обращайте внимание is a perfectly polite thing to say. In English, pay attention is fairly rude. So if you feel kind of weird about using the imperative, remember that it is a polite form in Russian. Russian has other less polite ways to indicate the imperative, but this form that we're learning now is perfectly polite. If you ever have any doubts, you can always just throw in пожалуйста, and it will be super polite. The Russian imperative has two forms. It has a ты form and a вы form. And again, if you're, stressing about how polite you're being, you can always use the вы form if you have any doubts. So, finding the imperative. Brace yourselves, this looks scarier than it is. In order to form the imperative, you have to start by finding the verb stem. And already this sounds scary, but we already know how to find the verb stem, even if we don't know that. So if you put the verb, any verb, in the они form, it will show you the stem. So let's do this with some verbs. We have знать, it's going to be они знают, танцевать, они танцуют, показать, они покажут, окончить, они окончат, приготовить, они приготовят. So that is our step one. We put the verb in the они form. And then our second step is to remove the ending, both the personal ending and the vowel that's the conjugation marker. So if we do that, знают becomes zna, танцуют becomes танцу, покажут becomes покаж, окончат becomes оконч, приготовят becomes приготов. Once we do that, we will see that our verbs have split into two familiar classes, vowel stem verbs and consonantal stem verbs. Let's start with vowel stem verbs because they're almost always easier. If the stem ends in a vowel, and that vowel can be a, it can be u, it can be yeah, the rule is the same whether it's a, u, or ya. In any case, we're going to add и краткое to the vowel for the ты form of the imperative, and и краткое те е to the vowel for the вы form. So let's look at some examples. Zna from знать becomes знай, знайте. Танцу from танцевать becomes танцуй, танцуйте. You can also use it with vowel stem verbs that have a stem ending in ye, like болеть, to be sick. You could say болей, болейте, like keep on being sick, man. Or я, as in гулять, to go for a walk. Гуляй, гуляйте. Things get a little tricky if we have a reflexive verb. If we have a reflexive verb, the reflexive ending will be с я after и краткое and с мягкий знак after и краткое те е. Remember, we add ся to consonants and с мягкий знак to vowels. So заниматься is going to become занимайся, занимайтесь. Возвращаться, to return, imperfective, is going to become возвращайся, возвращайтесь. And then there are a couple of important things to note. First of all, ava verbs. Remember, like давать, вставать, узнавать, and so on and so forth. Regain that va in the imperative. So давать becomes давай, давайте. Вставать becomes вставай, вставайте. Преподавать becomes преподавай, преподавайте. And then the other thing to watch out for are these dot type verbs. And they are going to have an imperative with die. So dot becomes die, дайте. Передать, to pass on, becomes передай, передайте. And those are used pretty commonly in the imperative. So you really want to be sure that you memorize the forms давай, давайте, дай, дайте, and передай, передайте. Those are important. So that was vowel stem verbs. Vowel stem verbs are the most common and the simplest type of verbs to deal with. So many verbs are going to have that kind of imperative, like знай, читай, сделай, изучай, получай, and so on and so forth. So that's very easy. So if you have any doubts, you can always just do that and you're more likely than not to be correct. However, there are also some very important consonantal stem verbs that are commonly used in the imperative, and you definitely need to know them. So what do we do if we have a consonantal stem? If the stem ends in a consonant cluster, we're going to add E, not I краткое, but full-on E in the T form and itya in the V form to the stem. And it can be either stressed or unstressed. So let's look at some examples. Закончить, to finish, becomes закончи, закончите, finish. Окончить, to graduate, becomes окончи, окончите, graduate. Начать, which becomes начнут in the agni form, becomes начни, начните, start. Смотреть, which becomes смотрят in the ani form, becomes смотри, смотрите. So note what scary little thing happened there. It's они смотрят, but смотри, смотрите. The stress shifted back to the stress of the infinitive and the ya form. So if the stress is on the ending in the infinitive and the ya form, that's where the stress is going to be for the imperative as well. So something to keep in mind with these shifting stress verbs. And we need to know that because if the stem ends in just a single consonant and the ending is stressed in the ya form, we're also going to add a stressed e or itya. So я покажу, I show, becomes покажи, покажите. Я напишу becomes напиши, напишите. Спрошу, спросит becomes спроси, спросите. Notice that we take the stem, we take the consonant for the stem from the ani form, спросит, but we take the stress from the ya form, спрошу, спросите. The same with попрошу, попросит becomes попроси, попросите. So that is a little bit tricky. And these are all commonly used verbs in the imperative. So покажи, напиши, спроси, попроси. You want to know all of those. Those are important to know for the imperative. If you have a reflexive verb, both forms are going to end in a vowel. So we're going to add some mягкий знак to form the reflexive. Учись, учитесь. And then finally, we have this very small but important group of verbs that are consonantal stems, and they have the stress on the stem in the ya form. And for those, and this is going to look kind of weird and sound kind of weird, you're going to add mягкий знак for the th form and мягкий знак те for the ani form. So it's actually going to end in a consonant. So приготовить, to prepare or to cook. In the ya form, the stress is still on the stem. Я приготовлю. We're going to take the stem from the ani form, они приготовят, and the imperative is going to become приготов, ending in a мягкий знак, or приготовьте. And we're going to write v, мягкий знак, те, е. The same with забыть, to forget. Забуду, забудут is going to become забудь, забудьте. And we're going to write de, мягкий знак, te, yeah. The same with ответить, to answer. Отвечу, the stress is on the stem. Ответит, we take the stem from the они form, so it's going to end in te, not ch, like in the ya form. And we're going to have ответ, ответьте. And if that's not a tongue twister, I don't know what it is. And we're going to write te, мягкий знак, te, yeah. And again, there's not a huge number of verbs in this group, but there's a handful, about half a dozen of very important ones, which are often used in the imperative, so memorize those particular forms. There are a couple of reflexive verbs that are important to know in this form, and they are going to take s, ya in the ты form and s, мягкий знак in the вы form. So познакомиться, to get acquainted, is going to become познакомься, and we're going to write m, мягкий знак, с, я, or познакомьтесь, and we're going to write m, мягкий знак, т, е, с, мягкий знак. Подготовиться, to prepare or to study for. Подготовься, and we're going to write в, мягкий знак, с, я, or подготовьтесь, and we're going to write в, мягкий знак, т, е, с, мягкий знак. And again, that's not a huge group, but it's an important group, and I really recommend memorizing, for example, these 5 verbs on this slide, and any other verbs that are in the example from the chapter. And those verbs will get you really far with this group. So that's it for the imperative. If it seems a little scary, don't worry. The rules make it look complicated, but almost all verbs are going to be in the знай, читай, изучай form. And then there's going to be a few that you can just memorize that are like спроси, попроси, смотри, or приготовь and забудь, or ответь. And so just try and memorize those, and you will be well on your way to using the imperative correctly.